Last week we talked about contours and the outside edges of things. Today I want to talk about how we define shape. So how do we look at a three-dimensional object in front of us and then put it onto our page as a two-dimensional surface, and yet have that magic of understanding what that shape actually is. So there's two basic ways that we show shape. One is defining the outside. So the objects that I'm working with today are a couple of boxes that are different shape and two roundish objects. One is the lemon we had worked with in the past, and another is a gourd that is sort of round and oval. So let's start with doing a contour drawing, and I'm going to start with this box up here. The edges are very, very straight, and as I turn and come down, let's see, I'll just go ahead and stay on the outside edge for right now. I'm not doing a blind contour. I'm doing and as I get into this other corner, there's a little lump there, and then this comes back and angles up. Find our edge here, find that box, and then it's going to go back and go to that corner. And then let's get the lid put in. Actually, I'll do the top edge first. So the top edge is going to come down in here somewhere, and about there. Turn and go up. Now this lid's going to come down and turn and go back that way. And then let's see, that sticks out. We didn't get this quite in the right place, but that's okay. This comes down and finds that corner. So there's that little box contour drawing. We also have a gourd here that's got a little more uneven edges, and so it's going to be a little more uneven. And I don't necessarily need to do the contour drawings on all of these for you. But what I'm going to have you do is you're going to do a contour drawing of each of those objects, and then I'm going to have you do a gesture drawing of each of these objects, and after that we will talk about shading. Our first thing is shape. So on something like a box, we have hard edges. So the box is got a top to it. And then when we define the sides that coming down, we are essentially telling ourselves what that box looks like. It's got a lid on it. It sticks out just a little bit there. The lid sticks out a little bit there. And we immediately understand what this looks like. I might not have my proportions quite right here. I need to change that a little bit. We'll talk more about proportions and getting perspective right later. But so this is a box that's got hard edges on it. And with hard edges, and I'm looking for one little thing, namely my eraser. I'll just clean up some of these lines that we're not going to use. I did that with what we had called a gesture drawing. So that's the box with very hard edges. We have a second box sitting here that has slightly rounded edges. So as this comes a little bit closer to me and I'm looking more down onto this, it's a little lower box, I'm seeing the top of it more. These edges, when we go to do the shading, are not going to be as defined and as sharp as they are on that box because they're rounded. So there's actually a little corner here that wraps around. That is not a hard edge, it's a curved edge there. So two different boxes. Clean that up a little bit. In shape, and now a lemon. Our lemon, remember, was a little bit oval, had a little bit of a nipple on it and its stem came off. And then we have this gourd that is bigger than the lemon, and it's going to fit in this space right in here. So what I want to have you do is go ahead and you'll have this picture to work from. Just work on getting these shapes somewhat on your page. They're not going to be perfect this time around, but this is going to give you those basic shapes. So we define the shapes with outside dimensions, just like we did with those contour drawings. And so I'm going to stop for a minute. These objects, I'm going to sort of decide which one I did the best drawing on and use that one to do shading. So let's talk about how this shading is going to work. The big box, let's start with the big box. If we look carefully at that photograph, we're going to notice that the lighting is darkest over on this side here, and it's medium here and it's a little bit lighter there. And that's because we have a light coming from this direction. And so with that light coming from that direction, this becomes the shadow side. This is because the light is a little above, it's getting the top of the box more than the side of the box. And I'm actually going to have to look at my photographs because depending on how I had my curtains open, I might have the side of the box a little lighter than the top. But we have it a little bit different between those three. So as we do this shading, now shading can be done in straight lines. It can be done in those circular lines that we did to form shape the other day. It can be diagonal. It can be crisscrossed. So I'm going to do, and depending on how hard you press with your pencil, depends on how dark it gets. I'm going to work with a 4B, which is right in the middle of my soft range, rather than going with my super soft. I don't want to use the HB because I can't get dark enough with it. So let's go ahead. This is a white box, but it's surprising how dark that side is. And a value card is a handy thing to have. This is a range of values, and you can compare it to what you've got in front of you. You can hold it out partway between and just look and see how light or dark that seems in relation to the value card. And see, now my value card, my light's not as good on it, and so my white is looking even whiter than that. But my difference between my top and my bottom should be about 2 value differences. So if I get this side here about the value, let me just get a little bit of it and I can show you how that value card works. We'll talk more about local color versus form shape coloring. But the shadow here, even though this is a white box, this shadow is a couple of values darker than the lightest side. And depending on how my lighting works, it might be even more than that. And I would try setting something up in your window or with a light desk lamp going one direction on it to give yourself a little lighted object that you can play with. Okay, so now that's the darkest side. This side is now a little bit darker than the top. And I'm also seeing a little bit of a shadow underneath of the lid. And when I'm getting to the edges of where this is going to have a hard square difference, I want to be sure that my shading comes right up tight to that point, because otherwise it's going to look uneven there. See how this looks sort of jagged? But if I come back in and do a second layer over this and just bring it right to those edges, come in with the eraser here too and clean this up just a little bit. Now I can take my finger, or if you have got a smudging tool, you can smudge it with a smudging tool. This is a little bit darker right underneath of here. And maybe that should be just a hair lighter than it is. So let me just take my eraser to this and just erase a little bit of this off. I'm trying to get this even. It's not coming very even. Let me smudge that around again, make that a little bit. So now we have the traditional, oh, and let's see, we have a shadow that comes off of this too, and I'm going to just do it by smudging. There's a shadow that runs off of that, and it comes just right off of that corner, so I've got to clean that so that that shadow really shows. And I'll clean up this edge with my eraser just a little bit. So now we're seeing the traditional lighting where you have a light side, a medium side, and a dark side. And it makes something like a box really stand out. And see, that should come over there. Yeah, that's better. There. So now that is, then when we look at that, we say three-dimensional, that's a box. It's got very hard square edges. Now this other box has rounded edges. As you can see from the shape of the top, it actually has rounded edges. And my drawing here is a little screwy. I'm going to go and work on this drawing that I did with the gesture drawing to do that shading. And I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. Remember, when we do the gesture drawing, you're doing a variety, several loose lines through something, and then you come back in and you clean it up to get your nice finish. Now on this box, because this is not a hard edge, it's a rounded edge, we are going to have a variation in shading. So as it goes around this corner, it's mid-tone, and then as it gets further around, it darkens up. And the local color of this box is sort of a cream color, so it's showing it as being a little bit darker here than the white box did. I like doing sort of cross-hatching back and forth to build in, and depending on how dark I want to get something or how finish, it depends on how sort of slow I do this and fill in. So you can sort of rough it in and then come back in and fill in between the lines that you first put down. Now as it gets into here, this is going to grade just a little bit, so I'm not going to press as hard. And then when it gets around this corner, let me just do a little vertical there. As it gets around this corner, it's lighter here than the rest of that. And I'm going to smudge that just a little bit to get that lighter. This is going to go just a touch darker than what I thought. Notice how you sort of build things up, and then as it gets around this corner, my pencil lead is starting to break on this pencil, it's going to get quite dark, and it's going to grade between the two, so that gets quite dark. And then the shadow running off of this, there's actually light coming in a couple of directions because I have a sort of a bay window that this light is coming in on. So it's lightest on top, mid-tone here, darkest there. So now that's square things, but let's talk about these rounded objects. So our lemon, we did a little tiny bit of shading on this lemon the other day, and the lemon is lightest up here, but I also have some bounce light that comes in underneath of here. And so this is going to be a little bit lighter right in there, and let's get that line off of there. And it's going to be quite light up here. This is dirty because it's smudged from the other work, but that's okay. It's gonna leave this. So this is the lightest place. And then my darkest place is right about here. So let's start with my shading here. Just like when we built up the object from the middle tone, we can do the same thing with building up the shading. And so it's pretty dark on the shading all back in here. I'm going to start with going one direction on this shading, and then I'm going to have to lift my pencil and barely touch to get this a little bit lighter in here. And it's darkish there. And is it as light? I'm going to close one eye and sort of look at it and go, is it as light here as it is there? It's pretty darn close. And now I'm going to come back in and do some shading the other direction so that my center of this lemon is getting the darkest, and then it's lightening up a little bit. Nice. And now the other way that this is going to show how light or dark it is what's happening with the background. So let's see, that lemon just comes underneath of there. There's a big beautiful shadow underneath of this lemon, and when I come in and find that very dark space right next to the lemon with that shadow, it's going to help make this light space. Let's just smudge this a little bit, smudge that a little bit. Yeah, that looks better. And then we're going to bring this out. And this stem is darker. It's almost a silhouette. There is a little bit of light on it, but from my angle I can't see it very well, so I'm going to just make it a silhouette. And it's not quite as dark there. And then my background, let's just go ahead and let the shadow that came off of this box come up next to here. And see how when I make that background just a wee touch darker there, that's going to go darker right next to that box. It needs to go even darker on that dark side. And now I'm going to, just because things have gotten a little smudgy, I'm going to come back in with my eraser. This is a kneaded eraser, and I can make a little skinny top to it here. And voila! We have a round looking lemon, we have a boxy looking box, and we have another object here that I haven't done anything with. So let's go ahead and start. Oh, you know, one other thing. I'm seeing this edge here is not very nice. I need to have this not have a little break right there. So I've got to bring this in. Yeah, there we go. That's better. These edges, just like when we did the contours, the edges become very, very important. And if we have something that's broken and not doing what we want it to, then those edges are going to, and this is a shadow running off back behind there. Okay, that lemon is very slightly darker than what's behind it, so I can bring a little tiny bit. So close your eyes every so often, one eye, and look at it. Sometimes it's easier to see where the shading, where the light and dark patterns are when you do that. Okay, our last object here is the gourd, and it's a little bit more complex than the lemon in that it has ridges on it. And to show those, we need to do a graded shadowing on it. But first, let's sort of look at the direction things are going on that. I'm seeing a little, it's where the end of the stem was. And then all of these ridges angle up in here. They follow the curve of this. And as they work their way around, they change their curve the other direction. So sort of seeing that's going to help us a whole lot in doing this shading. Got those little extras off. Our lightest place is right up here. Remember, our light is coming in from this direction, and so it's hitting all of these from the top. It's always helpful when you first draw to maybe give yourself this little arrow and say, where is my light coming from? What angle is it coming into my picture? It helps as we're working with this. If you have a still life setup, your light may change some during the time that you're working. Every few minutes it actually shifts. Now we have two types of shading on here. One is basic form shape. The other is also form shadowing, but it's shadowing to show these little ridges. So let me just get the first basic on here. So it's a little darker down in underneath of here. I have a little bounce light coming up in here, so it's not as dark as it might be. We're actually, our darkest place is over here. So my darkest place is over here. And then I can lighten that just a little bit, do some crosses in here. Now I'm going to want to start doing the shading for those ridges. And because these are little soft edges, like the lemon or this itself, those edges are a little bit soft, unlike our big box. But remember, around the edge of the small box, around that small box, we had a grade here that went from light to dark, and I actually can lighten that just a little bit. You can lighten this side just a wee tiny bit. So it grades from this shade to that shade across through there. We need to do the same thing when we do these ridges. So it's going to be darkest right on the back side of that ridge, and then it's going to be a little bit lighter, not quite as dark. Same with down in here, not quite as dark. This is a little darker right in here. And then it's going to grade out. I'm lifting my pencil up and not pressing as hard to get the softer grades. And now I've got another one happening right in here. So those lines sort of told me where the edge of that was going to be. And so they come in here, and then we're just going to be a little softer, a little darker right in the middle of that, a little softer at those edges. I can smudge that just a tiny bit. I'm going to come back in with the eraser and lift out some of those lighter spaces. And that's a little bit darker there. I've got another one that's coming down in through here. And then when it comes down over this edge, it's a bit darker in here too. And it's just softly going up over that edge. Here's one more little bit here. And there's just a soft one, not as dark, over there. Soften those edges. Soften those edges. Find the edge of that. Find the edge of that. And then over in here, we have some more in this dark area, but they're not as strong because the value difference isn't as great. Now we also have, just like with the lemon, I've got a dark shadow underneath of here. And that's going to lighten out into here. And then this little guy is pretty dark. And that shadow comes all back in here. This is a little bit darker on this edge than what the background is, so that can be darker. And then we actually have a shadow back behind this box. So let's just go ahead and put that in, because that's going to help us see. And we can darken this just a touch back in there. This whole table is a tiny bit darker. And then I'm going to take my eraser and I'm going to clean up and lighten, because when you're drawing you smudge it a little bit, so it's really nice to have this eraser to come back in and get my lightest spots pulled back out. And I can sometimes soften the edges when I do that. So just come in and sort of lift a little bit of that. It's lighter right there, and everything else is a bit darker. Okay, and this is surprisingly light right in here. And then I can take my value card and double check what I've done here. So I've done, that value is about this value 7. And if I lift this up and look over here and hold this about halfway between the object and close one eye and just sort of see how that darkness is, that's feeling pretty good. That back This back should go a little bit darker though. Surprisingly, this is a little darker back in here. But notice how that bit dark, with that being a bit darker, that helps this light side feel lighter. And I'm going to darken that background just a touch more there. Lift that off just a wee touch. I don't want this just to circle that. If I have those lines just circling that, it looks unnatural. And then this box, remember, is going to be going darker up in here. I'm not going to do any more of it than that, but it just to indicate that that's what's happening with that box. Let's lift a little more of this off of here. What's happening here? This doesn't look right. And then this is much darker right in underneath of here. I can go even a little darker. Okay, so we now have 4 objects. Oh, look at this. Got my smudgy fingers all over that. 4 objects, of which we have shown how shading on it creates the feeling of full volume. The outline drawing shows what the shapes are, and that is the shading on the box there. So you guys get to play with those. This, of course, is the hardest of the bunch, I think it's going to be for you. And we're going to talk more about shaping boxes and things like that later. But for now, don't worry about it if your shapes aren't perfect. We just want to have the 3 sides to it so that you can play with that shading. Okay.